Okay. All right. So hello, I am Tiffany Rao, and I teach in the College of Education, Department of Special Education at Cal State Fullerton. And today I'm going to be presenting a webinar about highly sensitive children. And I'm really excited. I'm really passionate about this topic. So thank you for being here. Thank you for investing this time in your professional development and also in learning new skills to help some of our more vulnerable students in schools. I am from the Department of Special Education. This is not specific to special education, but it does apply to all students, whether they have disabilities or do not have disabilities. Sensitivity is something that shows up genetically in across the board. So it will be relevant for whatever you happen to teach. So I'm going to jump right in. Let me read you a couple of perspectives. Okay. I think there's something wrong with my 9-year-old. He cries easily and it's intense. He doesn't like going to noisy restaurants or parties, even though all the other kids are having a great time. He covers his nose when I cook in the kitchen and covers his ears when loud commercials come on. Oh, and he complains about the texture of food or says things are spicy when they are not spicy. It's so over the top. Sometimes he yells and cries until I have to take away privileges and special things or give him a timeout. But none of that works. That's how stubborn he is. He's very smart, so I know he knows better. All right, let's look at a different perspective. My 9-year-old is so sweet. He's quiet at school, but what a character when he's in the comfort of home. Sometimes I wish that his friends and teachers could see that side of him too, but I guess he's a private kind of guy. He doesn't care for parties and he prefers quieter activities, but he can get very silly and wild too, like any kid. He's really smart. I mean, he blows us away with his ideas. He loves animals and he's so gentle with them. He's picky with what he'll eat, but I'm not worried about it. He gets enough food from each food group and he's growing just fine. He has big feelings and he doesn't always know what to do with them. We're working on that. Deep breaths, hugs from mom or dad, and helping him verbalize his feelings is helping, but I know it will take some time. So, two perspectives, same child. This is hypothetical, but it's really based in reality. It's based in what we sometimes hear from various parents when they have a sensitive child at home. And both perspectives are valid. Both are accurate. The children that I'm going to be talking about today, they are sweet. They are so caring. You see them with animals or helping another child, it just melts your heart. They're very connected to nature. They get overwhelmed sometimes. They are picky eaters often. Sometimes they cry very intensely at things that maybe other kids could just shrug off. And neither of these perspectives, neither of these parents, I should say, are bad parents. Okay, this parent right here, the first one that I shared with you, this is kind of common sense, no nonsense parenting that works just fine for about 80% of kids that are not what is considered highly sensitive. But 20% of kids have an innate genetic disposition to sensitivity. And these two perspectives can raise two very different types of adults by the time they get to adulthood. The child that grew up with parents who have this perspective or in an environment, school and home, with adults that have this perspective, the world is their oyster. They will be able to manage their feelings. They can't change their innate genetic sensitivity trait. They're always going to have some big feelings to deal with, but they'll learn the tools and the skills needed to manage and regulate those feelings. They will be able to embrace who they are so that they can use their sensitivities as a superpower. They are more likely to be able to narrow down a career that they'll be good at and that will be very fulfilling to them, and find relationships, friendships, romantic relationships that are also a good fit for them. A sensitive child who grows up when this perspective is dominant, every parent, I first want to say, this is not a bad parent. Every parent gets to the end of their rope, right? And it's like, right? We all have those moments. That's fine. But if this is the predominant attitude in the home of a sensitive child, the child who grows up in this kind of an environment is more likely to have a lot of difficulty in adulthood. They are more likely to be very challenged at work, have tumultuous relationships perhaps, and possibly, well, are more prone to mental health issues such as anxiety and depression, and possibly major mental health issues. This is why I'm so passionate about this topic. It's because these kids are so susceptible to their environment, for better or for worse. And parents and teachers together can make all the difference, for better or for worse. Common sense parenting does not always cut it for these kids. These kids can be a gift to the world, and they have been. There's a lot of very inspiring leaders who are highly sensitive themselves. And so that's why I said they're the hidden gems. You might not necessarily take a lot of notice of them until maybe they're having a big meltdown, but there's so much potential there. And the way that we see them, the perspective that we have, and the way that we interact with them is crucial. So let me go over. I haven't even started yet. We've barely scratched the surface. Let me talk about what we're going to cover today. So I'm going to talk about exactly what is high sensitivity. I've given you a few hints. I've mentioned that it's innate and it's genetic, but I'm going to really get into it. I will share with you a highly sensitive child test that you could even kind of take with a tally mark right now if you have a student or your own child that you think, are they highly sensitive? I'll talk about the science behind it, the 6 most common problems that highly sensitive children have. Sensitive boys, I'm going to touch on that because they have a little bit more of a challenge being sensitive even than girls do because of societal kind of beliefs. Then I'm going to talk about diagnosable conditions versus high sensitivity. High sensitivity is not a diagnosis. It can affect, I think I mentioned already, students with disabilities or without disabilities. So it's relevant to everybody, but it itself is not a disability or a diagnosis or a condition. Then I'll get into highly sensitive children at school and teaching strategies and kind of teaching mindsets that can really help. So since we're a small group, go ahead and anytime you want to ask a question, unmute yourself. You can wait till I pause or just interrupt me in case I don't pause for a really long time. I don't mind at all. I love questions. And then otherwise, please remain muted unless you're asking a question or sharing a thought too. I love that as well. And I will be sharing links and documents that we'll use. So actually, let me do that right now. In the chat, I'm going to share my PowerPoint so that you can have it. Okay, should be downloading in the chat right now, ready in a couple for you to download if you would like to do that. And I will try to remember to do that again later in case we have some others joining us. Okay, so what is high sensitivity? High sensitivity is scientifically or in academic journals, it's or psychology, I guess, journals, it is actually called sensory processing sensitivity. But the more common term for it is high sensitivity, highly sensitive person, HSP, highly sensitive child. I'm going to say HSC a lot throughout this presentation because I'm talking about highly sensitive children. And it is a normal genetic variation in innate human temperament that affects about 20% of the population and is present at birth, roughly 50-50 between males and females. So that means about 20% of males are highly sensitive and about 20% of females are highly sensitive. 20% is too high of a percentage to be considered abnormal. It's a minority. It affects a minority of people, but it's not a disability, diagnosis, disorder, dysfunction, anything like that. It's also found, I think this is so interesting, in about 20% of nearly all animal species studied so far for high sensitivity, all of them, about 20% there too, and even some plant species. And highly sensitive individuals are deeply reflective. They are sensitive to subtleties and they're easily overwhelmed. I'll talk more about all of that. These qualities can translate into high intelligence, creativity, and conscientiousness. It can also result in fussiness as a baby or young child, intense tantrums that continue beyond what seems like a normal age for intense tantrums, or withdrawal. Since 80% of children are not highly sensitive, teachers are not trained to recognize or take sensitivity into consideration, often leaving highly sensitive children without the support that they need. So let's look at the test. This is from before, okay, hold on just a second. I am going to pause my share. Okay, let's see. Are you seeing just me now? You should be. Yes. Let me share my sources with you. So this book right here, I have used heavily for this webinar, and this test that I will show you back on the screen in a moment is directly from this book. This book is written by Dr. Elaine Aron, and it is called The Highly Sensitive Child. Great resource. If parents come to you and have, things that they're sharing with you that you recognize from this webinar, you might recommend this book. It is life-changing for a lot of parents. It certainly was for me. My daughter's highly sensitive, and this was so helpful. I think I read this when she was about 6 or so, and it just made everything make so much sense. So that's where the test is I'm about to share with you. It's from this book. I don't think the child's test is online, but there is a test for adults that I'll share with you as well in a moment that is online. I also used this book, The Strong Sensitive Boy by Dr. Ted Zeff. When I get to the boys part, this is the book that I used the most. And then I'm also going to share, I'll just share it with you now though, Coping Skills for Kids Workbook. I love this book. It is on Amazon. It's not very expensive, maybe $20 or less. And you could use it in a classroom. You can use it with kids, your own children, and I think it's even helpful for adults. There's all these deep breathing activities, kind of fun games that help just bring a child's kind of overstimulation down to a more manageable level. Really great book. So I love that. Okay, let's go back to this test. Here we go. Can you guys see that? All right, perfect. So these are true or false. If you want to take this test for a child that you have in mind, just do tally marks for everything that's true. So true or false, my child startles easily, complains about scratchy clothing, seams in socks, or labels against skin. Learns better from gentle correction than strong punishment. Seems to read my mind. Uses big words for their age, notices the slightest unusual color, has a clever sense of humor, seems very intuitive, is hard to get to sleep after an exciting day, doesn't do well with big changes, wants to change clothes if wet or sandy, asks lots of questions, is a perfectionist, notices the distress of others, prefers quiet play, asks deep, thought-provoking questions, is very sensitive to pain, is bothered by noisy places, notices subtleties like something's been moved or a change in someone's appearance, considers if it is safe before climbing high, performs best when strangers aren't present, and feels things deeply. 13 or more checks or tallies, and your child is likely highly sensitive. Now, there's a lot more than 13 on here, so you can imagine 2 different children with high sensitivity may look very different. Okay, they're not all going to have all of these traits. They could almost be totally opposite. I can't tell if there's 26, but they could almost have completely different traits, but still be considered highly sensitive. And if you are interested, if you feel like this kind of describes me, you can take a test for adults. It's free, it's quick, at hsperson.com. You don't have to give them any information. The test is just right there for anybody to take, and it's kind of fun and interesting. I'm also highly sensitive myself. So there are actually, remember I mentioned that this is in humans and animals and plants. Why? Why are 20% of all these populations highly sensitive? Well, the theory that scientists have come up with based on lots and lots of research is that there are evolutionary benefits to the advancement of a species when a minority reflects before acting. So I'm going to talk about this more in a moment, but one of the brain differences in highly sensitive individuals is that they have a strong pause to check system in their brain, in their frontal cortex, to be specific. And so these are people who pause, and you can see this in children. You can see this when some kids rush out to a new playground, let's say, and then some are holding back and checking things out. That's pause to check. There's a benefit to having 20% of people, of animals, checking everything out before they jump in. They notice potential danger sooner. They think carefully about consequences, pause, consider what might happen, and then develop the best strategy to move forward. And they may even detect changes in weather. If you think about people who live close to the earth, people in tribes, they may detect changes in the weather and then be able to respond accordingly so that the whole tribe can benefit from that. So why isn't everyone highly sensitive? Why is it just this minority? 20% seems to be the right amount of people to have this trait. If everybody were highly sensitive, then we wouldn't have people rushing towards danger right away without thinking, and we need that. Paying attention to subtle details, processing information deeply, gathering information for comparison to past situations so that they can solve the present problem can pay off. But sometimes it's a lot of work and a huge waste of time. We have to sort of control this pause to check and this deep processing. When somebody is highly sensitive, they have to control that to an extent so that they can get things done. So if everybody was doing that, I think a lot of time would be wasted and things wouldn't be done enough. We have the best chance at survival when a minority of the population pays close attention to things and thinks deeply, while another part of the population is good at acting fast without thinking and charging forward toward a threat. So we need all of the people. All of the kind of people are necessary for the advancement of humans, really. So brain differences. Babies with, they have found that babies with more electrical activity and blood flow to the frontal cortex, which is this front part of the brain here, are more likely to be highly sensitive. And this is that pause and check system that I mentioned. Non-sensitive brains have a stronger activation system that acts as a go for it system. This part of the brain wants us to explore, pursue, and experience new things. But some highly sensitive people are strong in both. And that can really be an advantage. Oh, I'm sorry. I think my, okay. All right. That kind of sensitivity can be an advantage because they can be really good at risk taking, because they're both pausing and checking and taking risks. I think about my daughter. My daughter loves adventure. She loves to kind of climb up on rocks. We go to Joshua Tree. She loves Joshua Tree specifically for all the rock formations, and you can scramble on the rocks. And we were just there actually earlier this month, and I would get so nervous. But she's really careful. And she goes, I'm careful, Mom, I'm really careful. And, my husband vouched for it. Yeah, she really checks things out and doesn't step on rocks that aren't going to be safe. Okay. Well, we still got her, a helmet and knee pads and everything just to be careful. But she actually is really careful. So as I was preparing for this webinar, and I was reminded of how careful and how good sensitive people can be at sort of high adventure activities, if they're into that, it gave me a little bit of peace of mind about her, because as a mom, I do worry. So going back to those two examples of perspectives that I gave you in the beginning, I'm going to talk now about differential susceptibility. That is the academic scientific term for what I was talking about at the beginning, where we had the one parent that was like, oh my gosh, this kid is so over the top, so dramatic. I don't know what to do. I give him timeouts, versus a supportive, understanding environment that helps the child embrace who they are. Highly sensitive children who are raised in invalidating environments, or which doesn't necessarily mean like bad parenting at all, just invalidating to who they are. And that's the predominant perspective. Or have difficult childhoods, are at home and or at school for a long period of time at school, like year after one bad year. If they've got support at home, they'll be okay. But year after year after year, they are more prone to difficulty in adulthood and mental health issues than even non-highly sensitive people who have had difficult childhoods. And on the other hand, the highly sensitive children who have positive childhood experiences with adults at home and at school, who are understanding, nurturing, validating, and supportive in helping them embrace and cope with their sensitive trait, tend to have better outcomes in adulthood, even the non-highly sensitive children. So it is for better or for worse than the norm. What we do as parents and teachers matter with all kids, but it is even more impactful. It has an even more profound impact on sensitive children. So let me get into a few more traits. First, I want to talk about the acronym DOES, and this comes from Elaine Aron. It stands for these four traits that I'm going to talk about, DOES. It's an easy way to remember. D stands for depth of processing. So sensitive people process things very deeply. If you viewed or attended my previous webinar on introversion, that might sound familiar. We talked about that with introverts. This is similar, but not exactly the same. There can be extroverted, highly sensitive people too. So it is different, but kind of similar to what I talked about previously. So depth of processing, their brains take in a lot of information. They are taking in all these down here, sensitive to subtleties, all these subtle things, noises that nobody else is noticing, tone of voice that somebody's trying to hide their irritation, but it's coming out in the tone of their voice and other people don't really notice it. The sensitive child is like, what's that all about? They're taking in more visual information, more touch, all kinds of subtleties, and then they're processing everything really deeply. This can lead, of course, to overstimulation. If there's a lot going on, a lot coming in, and they're processing it all at a deep level, it can be very taxing on the central nervous system and just our brains. And so they are prone to emotional reactivity. The E stands for two things: emotional reactivity. These kids can be more emotional, cry louder and harder than typical kids, than the other 80%. They might react to things that other kids shrug off. And they have a deep level of empathy, which is so great. This is a real benefit to the rest of the world, but it can feel like a curse to the sensitive person because they are feeling empathy for everyone. And other people kind of have a lot of baggage sometimes. So it can be a lot to be around a lot of other people because they're feeling everything from everyone, sometimes if their empathy is especially strong. But what a great friend, a great person these people can make because they have so much empathy. A few more common traits I want to go over. They are often intuitive, have good intuition, creative, careful, conscientious. If I've talked about it, I'm going to go over it. But when they're overwhelmed, they might come off as too sensitive, too dramatic, or party poopers to other people who don't understand. They might experience mood swings almost instantly. And I can remember when my daughter was a baby, I would see other babies and they would sort of whimper and like work up to a cry. So you'd have a little bit of a warning, like, oh, gotta get the food ready for this baby. They're starting to get hungry, and you have a little bit of a warning. My daughter would go straight into scream crying as soon as she felt a little bit of hunger. So these kinds of things, you can almost see them at birth or when they're very young babies. They can be affected by other people's moods and emotions. They can be more affected by pain, medication, stimulants, including caffeine and alcohol. So sometimes a sensitive person needs less medication than usual. They might start taking a new medication that their doctor prescribed, the standard dose, and feel a ton of side effects. And then their doctor says, well, cut back by half, and they're fine. If it seems like they're being big babies about falling, they truly are in more pain. They're not just trying to get attention and sympathy. It really does hurt as much as they're acting like it hurts. They have a more reactive immune system. Sometimes they might catch colds easier. They have more allergies to both environmental and food, different foods. They have more food sensitivities. I personally cannot eat gluten and dairy. It's a huge hassle, but whatever, that's what it is. They have a heightened awareness of the five senses. They may have very vivid dreams, have a deep, rich inner life, tend to avoid violent content on TV and movies and the internet, may or may not cry easily. Some cry easily when they feel anything from joy to, sadness. Others maybe don't cry that easily. And adults may or may not be especially emotional. They may have been emotional as children and then still very emotional as adults, or they might have learned more emotional regulation, or that just kind of subsided a little bit. So they're not particularly run by their emotions necessarily, but they might be. So I mentioned this is some of it is going to sound familiar from my previous webinar. Is it just the same thing as being an introvert? No. But it's interesting because about 70% of people with high sensitivity are introverts and 30% are extroverts. Last webinar, I mentioned that 30 to 50% are introverts of the population, of the whole population. Generally, 30%, I think, is the most quoted percentage statistic, but I've also seen up to 50% of the general population. But high sensitivity is more predominantly introverts, but extroverts have to balance, highly sensitive extroverts have to balance needing external stimulation, needing all of that socialization just like any other extrovert, while at the same time feeling more quickly overwhelmed by it and needing to take breaks and recharge, even if they don't want to, or just needing to make sure they give themselves that time the next day. So they kind of have an extra challenge in that way. So now I'm going to get into the six most common problems for HSCs, for highly sensitive children. All right, first one is awareness of subtleties. This can be like a gift and a curse. A highly sensitive child may notice small things, the small things that you do, and show more appreciation maybe than a typical kid. That's so sweet, and we love that, right? They may notice the smell of smoke or the smell of gas before anybody else, and have that benefit of alerting others to potential danger. Or they might notice another child quietly crying on the playground and bring it to an adult's attention, or go to that child and give them support. They might also complain about small changes, like a change in the milk brand at home. You think it's milk. Are you kidding me? And they will literally notice. That was my daughter. She literally noticed that. We couldn't get anything by her as far as changing things like that, or she would notice. Sometimes she just noticed, but it was fine. Other times it's like, no, I'm not drinking this kind. Or maybe not wanting to use a pencil unless it's perfectly sharp, little things like that that can come up in the classroom. At school, they may pick up on a change in teacher's tone and take it personally. Now, this is not something that I'm going to say you have to change because you're doing the best you can, right? Teachers are, I know that it gets crazy. You're at the end of your rope. You're like, I'm about to burst. These kids are driving me crazy. And you're doing your best to stay calm and hide the fact that you are about to blow up. And you're doing a great job. But the highly sensitive kid in your class notices, and they might even take it personally, like they did something to cause this upset in you. The other kids, you're probably fooling them just fine. Now, not all highly sensitive children notice a lot of subtleties. They do in some ways, but not in every way, and not all the time, because sometimes they might be oblivious, actually, because they're wrapped up in their inner world. They might even present as, gosh, does this kid have ADD? Because they're so wrapped up in this rich inner world, or so overwhelmed by loud noise and bright lights that they're oblivious to even obvious things going on. So what to do? Number one is believe them. When they say it hurts, when they say it stings, when they say it tastes bad, it does. Even if it doesn't bother you, even if it doesn't bother other children. You hear all the time, oh my gosh, there's no way that hurt that bad. You're being dramatic. Probably not. It probably does hurt them that bad. And you can validate and then inform. So before you do anything else, if you have a child having a meltdown, and this goes for all kids really, but especially, it will be especially effective with a highly sensitive child, convey sincere respect and empathy for whatever experience they're having. Then tell them when and how the experience will end. So here's some examples. A child is, you just gave out popsicles outside and a kid's hand is sticky and they're crying, okay? And it's like, oh God, sticky hands, You can say, gosh, your hands got sticky. You don't like that feeling, do you? I can see how that would be annoying. You can go wash them once Jaden's back from the bathroom. So instead of saying, you're fine, just go play, you can say, oh, that is annoying, isn't it? Okay, you can go once the other kid's back from the bathroom. You're telling them when and how it will end. Then they can say, okay, I can tolerate that for 5 minutes or 1 more minute. Your lunch tastes too spicy? Oh, I hate when that happens. Drinking water after each bite can help. So offering them a strategy, a coping strategy. Are there any other parts of your lunch that you can eat? It's not fun to be hungry. So kind of steering them towards finding something else to eat, and then maybe problem solving, which I'll get to in a moment, about that lunch. You can set limits though on accommodations. So this would be maybe if you're a kinder first grade teacher and you have a child that never likes how you tie their shoes and they can't tie their shoes yet. So you could say, okay, I'm going to help you tie your shoes up to 3 times and I'll follow your instructions so we can make it comfortable for you. But after 3 times, I have to stop because I have other things to do. So you don't have to over accommodate these kids, but you can kind of just give them a heads up. Okay, I'll help you this much, but then I have a lot of other things to do. And many children will accept that. Not always, but many will. Punishment is not usually effective or even necessary. First of all, when a child's overwhelmed due to a sensory issue, it can turn into an emotional outburst. When we are in our predominantly emotion mind, we're not ready to learn. We're not going to learn very much. We're not going to learn a lesson. Emotions are usually irrational. So this is not the time to punish or even try to teach. This is not a teachable moment. Instead, you can solve the problem for now as best you can for that child. Do what you can to bring their emotional level down. And then later when they're calm, help problem solve. And if you can bring them into the problem solving, it is going to be that much more effective. So this is super empowering. It helps the child learn to solve their own problems. So example, when your lunch tasted yucky, you started screaming so loud that it hurt our ears. Next time your lunch is yucky, what could you do differently? And what would you rather have for lunch? Let's talk to your mom or dad about that. Okay, so that is what you can do when a child is sensitive to subtleties and then it's like causing a big reaction. Real quick, I'll just pause. Any questions so far? I know I've already given a lot of information. Any questions so far? You can unmute yourself. All right.
I don't have really a question, but I work in a school and I have noticed a student. He's not a student yet, but he comes over with his mom and the brothers for kinder and 2nd grade. And I often play music on Fridays, because it's Friday. And I noticed last 2 weeks, when he gets closer to the door, if the music is on, he does not want to get close to the gate. So I paid attention to him because I had read something about children who are very sensitive. So when I saw him, when I will see him on Thursday, and he's coming along, I'll make sure to lower the volume of the music so as not for him to be so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Good information there is because, we can help the children like you were saying before.
Yeah. Definitely. And that's a really easy, thing that you can do. You don't even have to cut out the music. Just lower it. Think about, okay, can the other kids hear this, but it's not going to overwhelm this kid. So that's a great way to think about that. Thanks for sharing.
Oh, Tiffany.
Hi, Mark Albert.
Hi. Sorry, I was late, but I had a meeting that got beyond what I thought. Is it true that aren't there also some similarities in how you help highly sensitive people with how you help gifted children? Some similar strategies?
Yes, I actually am going to talk about that because a very high percentage of gifted children are also highly sensitive, like 80%.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, really high. So absolutely, these kinds of things that I'm talking about are very, very applicable with GATE students, gifted students in a GATE class, but also with students with a range of disabilities, because it's not, like I said, a disability, but it can intersect, and there's a lot of overlap too with certain disabilities too, as well as giftedness. Yeah, great question. Thank you. All right, another common problem is over-arousal. So everybody, all of us, we seek just the right level of arousal. It's as automatic as breathing. If we get too little arousal, we're bored. We find something to do. If we get too much arousal, we've got so much to do. We've got too much to do. We've got deadlines. We've got, oh my gosh, we feel rattled. And then we may not perform well. We may not be our best selves. We might be grouchy with our families, right? Hscs become over-aroused more easily. Too much can come from outside, like crowded, noisy environments, or from the inside, like when a child imagines something really scary. And that feeling can become very over-arousing, or even something really exciting. And then they might even appear like they're hyperactive. Or if they imagine failing, a test is coming up and they get themselves so worked up about the test or some kind of performance that they have to do that they can get really rattled. It can cause a lot of difficulty if they have to perform a task or even enjoy something fun or pay attention in class or complete an assignment or an assessment. This kind of over-arousal, including emotional distress and or sensory overwhelm, can make some Hscs want to stay home more frequently. I did fine in school and there wasn't anything really horrible that ever happened to me, but I always wanted to stay home. And in fact, the school had to chat with my mom in first grade because she was letting me stay home too much. And I wasn't actually sick most of the time, but it was overwhelming to me. Even though I did fine, my teachers would never have guessed that I was having any issues, but I just preferred home because it wasn't quite as overwhelming and over-arousing. So if you notice, well, I put it down here, if you notice a lot of absenteeism, work with the family, especially if you're noticing some of these other traits, and think about maybe what's causing the overwhelm. It might not be anything within your control. It's just school itself. But, you can think about whether things can be adjusted so the child's more at ease, maybe a break in the middle of the day or in the middle of the morning and in the afternoon, just so that they can recharge and recuperate a little bit. Other things is practice mindfulness. I am thrilled that this is becoming more the norm in schools today. Practicing mindfulness, social emotional learning. This is going to benefit all students, all children, and it's really needed for our high sensitivity kiddos. So there's a lot of mindfulness activities all over that you can find on the internet, on TikTok. I just discovered, by the way, teachers of TikTok. I finally downloaded TikTok this weekend, because my daughter's 12 and I got to keep up with the tweens, you know. But of course, I went to all the dorky adult type of TikToks, like teachers of TikTok. But I was blown away, you guys. So many great ideas. So anyways, that was just a little sidebar there. But you can find so many great ideas about how to bring mindfulness into your class all over the place. Also, if they're having difficulty with a task, maybe it's an exam, like, you know, they know it, but then they break down when it's time for a test. You can have them maybe do it in a different setting, like go to another classroom, or see if, you know, the RSP teacher or the speech therapist, hey, do you mind? You know, I know this kid doesn't have an IEP, or maybe they do, and they just need a quiet place to take this test. Would that be okay? And you can practice it in a quiet setting before trying again in the regular setting. And that can really help. Prepare for failure also. Failure is a part of life. They are fearing failure, but they're going to have to get used to it. And so growth mindset activities, I'm also thrilled to see that that is becoming more the norm in class, in classrooms. Growth mindset activities are really, really helpful here for preparing for failure. Talk about what can go wrong, worst case scenario, and then how to handle that and normalize failure. Also, you can teach students directly about how overstimulation can affect performance. Like I said, it can affect anybody. So you can bring that sort of as a life skill into your classroom. And then teach coping skills. Like I said, this book, it is, I love it. One of my favorites, Coping Skills for Kids Workbook. It is by Janine Halloran, but just type in Coping Skills for Kids Workbook and it will pop up. Great activities that you could for sure do in the classroom. You could literally take probably 2 minutes a day to do a different activity each day. They're simple, they need very little prep, if any, and they are so effective. I use them pretty often in our family. Well, when needed. Another common kind of problem that can come up are these deep inner reactions. So because HSCs process things so fully, they are also more intense. They also have more intense emotional reactions. That can mean more happiness, more contentment, more joy, more excitement, and more misery, more anger, more anxiety, etc. They can be intensely fearful of making a mistake or getting in trouble. Even if they've never been in trouble and they're not the type of kid to get in trouble, they can be so scared of making, by accident, getting in trouble. And they feel more distress over, over things like unfairness, conflict, or suffering. All kids feel distress, but it's stronger for HSCs. For example, they may not be able to relax and enjoy recess right after learning about climate change. I really like Glennon Doyle, the author, and I listened to her book Untamed on audiobook, and she talked about how her daughter once learned about like a type of animal that's on the verge of extinction. And the teacher was teaching about all of this in kindergarten. And then the recess bell rang and all the kids ran out to recess. And her daughter could not go out to recess after hearing about this animal that's about to go extinct. She was just so distressed over it and she needed time to process that. She wasn't ready to go out to recess and run around and play. Her mind was still very much on this. They may not be able to eat if they hear their parents fighting. Okay, it might, oh gosh, makes them sick to their stomach to hear people fighting. They can't eat. They may cry or yell or tell if they see another child kill a bug. I can still remember when I was young, I saw someone step on a worm and it gave me this physical reaction that I still kind of get now when I remember this memory. It is like this visceral physical reaction that I had, and I was so disturbed for days after witnessing this. It's kind of a normal thing, right? Kids step on bugs. I wish they wouldn't, but it really produced a strong reaction in me. So what to do if they are really in distress? Give them space if needed, listen and validate, model emotional regulation. This is again going to benefit all your students, but if you can actually kind of model aloud emotional regulation, it's going to help your students so much. So let's say you come in and you're frazzled. There was traffic, or there was an accident, you were running late, and you know, the usual stuff, you got to get everything ready for the day and you just feel frazzled. You can say that to your kids. Hey guys, good morning. I got to tell you, I am feeling frazzled this morning. Here's what happened. I came to work and this and this and this, but just before you got here, I took 2 minutes to do some deep breathing. And I think I need 2 more minutes. Would you all do that with me? How powerful is that, right? First of all, you're normalizing that feeling of frazzled or distressed, and then giving them a coping strategy to deal with it. And a calm, supportive, non-judgmental, listening adult is far more effective long-term at helping children develop emotional regulation than punishment. Punishment can stop a behavior, but it's not going to stop the feeling inside. And for a sensitive child, it's going to turn that feeling on, it's going to like set that feeling on fire. But they will absolutely, you know, straighten up, stop crying, but then they're pushing and internalizing, and it's not healthy for them. Versus if you can just be calm, present with them, that actually activates their own calming, regulating neurotransmitters, helps them calm down, and then you can help them cope. You can say, what could we do next time? I get it. You were so overwhelmed. It was noisy. We were doing stuff that you didn't like. I get it. Look, let's think about what we could do next time. That is way more effective. It might not work as fast. That's why we're so reliant on punishment, because it works for what we see, which is the behavior, but what we don't see is that internalization. The internalization for a sensitive child can be not, I did something that was not okay. The internalization is, I am wrong. The way that I am is wrong. And we don't want that, right? That can cause long-term issues. So social emotional learning and activities to raise emotional intelligence can be very effective for highly sensitive kids. Awareness of others' feelings. I mentioned this earlier, is like a gift and a curse. And in some ways it's a gift to the world and a curse to the person itself, but not entirely, right? Some Hscs have especially strong mirror neurons. Mirror neurons is something that we all have, and it enables us to pick up on how other people are feeling. It's our empathy neuron. In Hscs, a lot of times these mirror neurons are especially strong, not in every single Hsc, but in a lot of them. And it enables them to literally feel what others are feeling. Sometimes, this is so crazy, but they may even pick up on a scent, not consciously, but pick up on a scent that is caused by an emotion in someone else. Likewise, their sensitivity to subtleties means they notice little nuances, furthering their ability to read people. They are especially attuned to the people closest to them, parents, family members, teachers, friends. A talking to from an adult at school can be crushing to them. because they feel the anger inside of that person or the disappointment, and then it's all being directed at them. They can take sweeping punishments. By a sweeping punishment, I mean the whole class, everybody, we're staying in from recess. I mean, that's really extreme. I don't think a lot of teachers do that anymore, but sweeping punishment, whole class punishment, or whole class lectures, right? A teacher who's going, you guys have not been doing your best work. Your work has been messy. A lot of you are turning it in late. You're not putting your names at the top of the paper. It's probably not true that every single person in the class is doing that. But when there's this sweeping lecture about all of you, then the highly sensitive kids are like in tears, even if they're super diligent and conscientious, and they're not the ones the teacher's talking to really, they're going to take it really to heart. And so it's misplaced discipline or punishment. Maybe it's getting through to the kids that need it, maybe not, because they're probably not going to take it to heart. The kids that are going to take it to heart probably don't even need it. And after one or two negative experiences, a couple of stern talking tos, they may become terrified of teachers or other adults. And it might take quite some time for them to trust their next teacher the following year, if they've had a really stern teacher one year. And older children, not so much younger children, just because their brain maturity is not there yet, but older children start to become aware of how others are feeling, even when the other person is not aware of it. Most people hide how they're feeling if the feeling is like embarrassing or inappropriate to the situation, such as like jealousy or fear or anger. And so even though they're trying to hide it, the Hsc might kind of know about it or see it or have an inkling about it. And now they have to deal with knowing how someone's feeling, but pretending not to know once they kind of get it that people don't always want you to know how they're feeling. So they have to deal with knowing that information, but pretend not to know. And then they're seeing a different verbal message from the person. No, of course I'm not annoyed with you, or I'm not the least bit scared. That's a lot. That's a lot to take in for a child. And so sometimes because of this awareness, Hscs might have a tendency to put others first in order to spare that person plus themselves the emotional distress of the other person being upset. So what can we do about that? I mean, not much other than really at home, probably with parents is where this can be dealt with the best. Just having open, honest conversations about it. That, yeah, this is how it is. Sometimes a person feels scared, or sometimes a person is annoyed, but they're just grouchy. And it's not necessarily something you did personally. They're just in a grouchy mood that day. They don't want you to know they're annoyed with you. You're going to experience that too. So we can address this by kind of just having some honest conversations about it. It's life, right? Caution in new situations. This is largely a positive trait. Again, this gives me peace of mind about my own child, because I know that when she's out there climbing the rocks, she is using a great deal of caution. Hscs are less likely to fall from trees, get lost, get hit by a car, try smoking, or even get abducted. Doesn't mean they're totally safe. We still have to protect our kids, right? But this caution is very reassuring, should be very reassuring to parents. They're cautious. They're more cautious about driving as they get older, about sex, and about who their friends are. But sometimes they might be like overly cautious, and they could use a gentle nudge to move forward in what really is a safe situation. So you can help nudge them by, if they're really fearful of a math test, or something like that. A new situation, right? It's not dangerous, but they're super cautious and maybe fearful. Remind them of past similar situations. Okay, class, this is going to be a lot like the last math test you took, right? And when they're reminded, okay, I've been through this before, then it's like, all right, I got this. I feel nervous, but okay. You can take it one step at a time. Let's say you teach kinder or first grade, when kids often have fifth grade buddies, but it's brand new. You can say, all right, when we go to meet our fifth grade buddies, you and your best friend can stay together and have the same buddy, or your buddies can be together with you. So if a parent says, oh, they've been crying all night about the fifth grade buddies, they're so big and they're scared of them, then you could just do kind of a quick little accommodation for them to ease their mind. And you can provide a retreat. So if you're going to have a noisy, loud, an assembly, like sometimes schools will do a reward assembly, like a laser show for doing really well on state testing. They did that at my daughter's school. She actually loved it. But let's say you have a kiddo who's just like scared because one assembly was really loud. You can say, all right, well, if the assembly gets too loud, you can stand outside the door with Mrs. Campbell, or you can even wait in the office until it's over. Give them an out if possible. And then, all right, so being seen as different. Since HSCs are a minority, they are subject to judgment. People tend to kind of size up, they tend to size up anyone different from the norm as either superior or inferior. Young children who are quiet and sensitive are associated with being popular in China, but unpopular in Canada. That's based on a study that was done. So culture makes a difference. Groups of people who live close to the earth, like I mentioned, people in tribes, they give high value to sensitive people because they've seen the benefit. And they often assume jobs that are highly kind of seen as very important, almost like doctors in Western, as healers and shamans. They're highly valued. American culture tends to give higher value to tough people who take risks. So you have a lot of power as a teacher to create the culture that you want in your class. And you can create a culture in your class where everyone is valued for what they bring, including risk takers, because we need them, including social butterflies, as well as quiet thinkers and thoughtful friends, etc. And you might already do that, but you might not have thought about it just because it hasn't come to your attention. Highly sensitive children will be judged negatively by others throughout their lives for who they are, for the way they are. They need people like you. They need their teachers, as many teachers as possible. But even if it's just a couple in elementary school and then a couple in middle school and high school, you alone can make a difference. By seeing them and showing them that you think that you're amazing and embrace their sensitivity, your connection with them will help carry them through the harder times and keep their confidence afloat. So they will have to be subject to judgment, negative judgment, as everybody is actually, but maybe a little more so. And if you give them that gift of seeing them and embracing and appreciating all the cool things about them, that's going to help carry them through the harder times in life. So you really do have so much power here to make a positive difference in their lives. And now let's talk about special challenges for boys. This is from that book that I mentioned earlier, The Strong, Sensitive Boy, by Dr. Ted Zeff. Great read. And this is just a quote from that book, I think from somebody that the author interviewed. I always felt different as a boy since I didn't act like other guys. When I saw boys fighting, I would get nervous and feel afraid. I always held back expressing my real feelings for fear of being shamed for being too sensitive. So the problem is not within sensitive boys. We need desperately more sensitive boys and men. We've got enough of the macho alpha type, right? We have plenty of them. We need to balance that out, and we need to change the meaning of masculinity, right? We desperately need that so that we have boys and men who have empathy, who can listen, who can be gentle. American society has long dictated that boys and men should be thick-skinned, emotionally controlled, and aggressive. Many boys are taught from a young age to act tough and repress their emotions. When boys don't conform, but instead show gentleness and emotions, they may be ostracized, humiliated, and treated as abnormal for a boy at school and maybe even at home. And this becomes internalized, where they feel like there is something very wrong with me. On the other hand, girls who express feelings are fulfilling other people's expectations for girls, which can actually help them to be more accepted by other girls. So highly sensitive girls have it easier than highly sensitive boys. So how can we support our sensitive boys? Most boys, and this is straight from the book, I really couldn't put it better than Dr. Zeff. Most boys, including those who are HSCs, have difficulty verbalizing their feelings due to both societal discouragement and actually having a smaller corpus callosum than girls, which is the part of the brain responsible for expressing feelings. So, but that's okay. It can still be taught and they can still become really strong at it. But that just means there's both this societal discouragement and their brains, differences in their brains that make it kind of hard to verbalize their feelings. But the HSC boys have big feelings and they need to verbalize them and learn how to do that. So I love these recommendations. Physical kinesthetic activities such as bouncing a ball can actually help boys to develop emotional communication. So while girls can a little more naturally just sit down and start talking about their feelings, it can help a boy to have a physical activity. Play, like you see on a lot of TV shows, dads taking their boys out to play basketball and then talking about something important, or tossing a ball and talking about life, right? That actually works. So even as a teacher, if you have a boy who is really, really sad and you don't know why, or had a meltdown, then they're more calm at the end of the day. You might say, hey, stay inside for a few minutes with me, and then start bouncing a ball with the child. And then as you're bouncing the ball, start probing and asking questions. So what happened earlier? What was going on? You seemed really upset. And they will be more likely to open up when they have that physical outlet. And then just any kind of spatial physical activity, physical movement, helps boys develop a sense of emotional safety. So giving them that outlet can be very, very beneficial, not only physically, but emotionally. For boys who seem to be high feeling, but don't want to talk, then you can really get it out of them by trying that. And I just want to read to you from this book. I wrote down okay. So if you'll just bear with me, I'm going to read to you. It's about one paragraph or a couple paragraphs of one person's experience. So, this is about a man named Jay who told the author how a compassionate teacher helped him feel safe when he was in 4th grade. He says, Mrs. Whitman sometimes used to let me help her clean the classroom during recess, a physical activity. I felt like I was special, getting to clean the blackboard and straighten the chairs. One day she told me that she noticed how sad I looked walking around the playground by myself when I went outside during recess. I guess I felt safe with her. Because I remember telling her that the other boys didn't want to play with me since I wasn't any good at football or dodgeball. And those games are all the other boys wanted to play. I told Mrs. Whitlaw about the time I played hopscotch with the girls. All the other boys teased me, calling me a girl. So I didn't want to go outside during recess. Mrs. Whitlaw told me that she liked gentle boys and that the world could use a lot more helpful boys like me. She told me that the other children were wrong for making fun of me. Later, Mrs. Whitlaw began praising me in front of the class, saying how helpful and kind I was. I think this helped make the other kids like me, which made me feel better about myself. Mrs. Whitlaw was the only teacher who praised me for being sensitive when I was a child. So think about that. How much of an impact. All these years later, Jay was an adult when he relayed this story, and he still remembered that. Like I said, what you do now, even if you're the only positive influence in this child's life, which hopefully you're not, but even if you're like the only teacher in their life that really sees them and appreciates them, that can help carry that child. And it can even improve their social capital with other kids if you see them in a positive light. And bullies tend to target kids who seem different, making Hscs and particularly boys more vulnerable to bullying. Sensitive children react more strongly than others, which further adds to their vulnerability because bullies like a big reaction. So when a bully sees that a highly sensitive boy reacts strongly, they are likely to intensify the abuse. Watch for the following signs of bullying so that you can intervene right away. And I know schools are really coming down on bullying, thank goodness. And so I'm not going to talk about how to intervene. I think that you guys have already had that, but if not, there's a lot of resources at your school and online on how to intervene if you think somebody's bullying. But I want to tell you the signs so that you can intervene right away. Obviously, if you see bumps and bruises, okay, I mean, I know that also might raise concerns about what's going on at home, but it could be bullying at school. Mysterious illnesses, so the child wants to go home or go to the office, specifically before recess, lunch, or maybe PE, when kids are able to kind of be off by themselves with less supervision. If a child has money missing or belongings missing repeatedly, sleep problems, they're very sleepy at school, maybe they're not sleeping well at night, they're very sleepy at school, they're irritable, they're depressed, poor concentration, or problems with school performance. If you notice these things, if a parent brings these things to your attention, definitely you want to pay attention and act so that it doesn't continue. All right, now let me talk about high sensitivity versus some diagnosable conditions, because you might be thinking, some of this sounds like autism. Okay, let's first talk about ADD, ADHD. Both kids with, and I mentioned here, I said, oh yeah, never mind. So both high sensitive kids and kids with ADHD or ADHD can be easily distracted, but for different reasons. For Hscs, it's because they notice everything, or they're in such deep thought that they notice very little. Both are characterized in part by emotional reactivity and overstimulation. Both have a greater risk for anxiety and mood disorders, more dependent on childhood for highly sensitive kids. But ADD and ADHD indicates a deficit in executive function, which is the part of our brain functioning that enables us to plan, focus our attention, remember instructions, and juggle multiple tasks successfully. Hscs typically have strong executive function, except when overstimulated or overwhelmed. Now, if a a person is like HSCs are generally good at tuning out distractions to an extent, but if distractions become numerous and prolonged, they're overwhelmed emotionally from within, they may become spacey and not be very good at paying attention, which can prompt teachers and parents to wonder if they have ADD, ADHD. So they could have both. That does happen, but it could be that they're just highly sensitive and overwhelmed all the time at school. HSCs tend to have a stronger blood flow to the right hemisphere of their brains, while those with ADD, ADHD have a stronger blood flow on the left side. So they are different, even though there are some similarities, but for different reasons. Okay, autism. I said SPS, sensory processing sensitivity, same thing as high sensitivity. It's interchangeable, so I kind of threw that in sometimes. So autism versus high sensitivity. Okay. There are some people with autism and their perspective is so important and they feel very strongly that it is one and the same. But the research does not support that. So let's talk about both. Infants with autism do not smile as much. They do not tend to imitate facial expressions or mouth the syllables of language like typical infants do, including highly sensitive children. Individuals with ASD, with autism spectrum disorder, have trouble with perspective taking, deciphering facial expressions, understanding irony, getting the gist of a story. They may hyper-focus on one couple of details of the story instead of getting the main idea. They need intervention with like reading comprehension for that reason. They often develop a fixation with like one topic or object or activity that may be so strong that it's kind of an obsession and it can interfere with their participation in activities at school or otherwise. They may have rigid adherence to routines, becoming visibly upset when routines are altered. And these are not typical traits for otherwise typical HSCs. So both do have sensory sensitivities though. This is where there's a lot of overlap. Okay, kids with autism often have strong sensory sensitivities. You might see them cover their ears when other kids are like fine with the noise. It's super loud to a kid with autism or maybe to a kid who's highly sensitive. So this is where the strongest overlap is. Also, they tend to both get very overwhelmed by environmental stimuli and may panic or have a meltdown or a tantrum in response. Overlap, yes. So some argue that high sensitivity is like on the high end of autism spectrum disorder. But the leading researchers in high sensitivity disagree with this due to the absence of major autism traits in most HSCs and due to brain differences between the two. Typical HSCs often display strong communication skills early on, and they pick up on social cues easily. HSCs and also HS adults may be a little awkward sometimes due to having to balance the depth of processing and large sensory input while carrying on a conversation, but not because they're unaware of social cues or theory of mind, which is the core deficit in autism. The highly sensitive brain shows higher than typical levels of activities in brain areas related to calmness, self-control, and self-reflection. And these areas are less active in those with ASD. There's another disorder that I want to talk about, and that is sensory processing disorder. So I've been talking about sensory processing sensitivity, and then there's sensory processing disorder. So let's talk about that, because that is a true disorder. Both HSCs and kids with SPD are more affected physiologically by sensory events like loud sounds, rough textures, bright lights. But kids with SPD have difficulty combining the information they receive from their senses in an organized way. Gets all jumbled up. SPD used to be considered part of ASD, but now it's considered a disorder of its own. Kids with SPD may find some sensory input unbearable, like a highly sensitive kid, but to an extreme. Or they may under-respond to stimuli, showing little or no or very slow reaction to pain or something that other people would find painful, like extreme hot or cold. So they might be slower to pull their hand away when they accidentally touch something really hot that burns them. Maybe some kids. Posture and motor skills can be affected. They might have awkward posture or gait. Some seek intense stimulation when dysregulated. Hscs do not typically experience major problems with everyday activities once they mature past early childhood, and then they're able to adapt. They might look real similar as toddlers, the two types of kids, because toddlers are just an extreme in and of themselves, right? And SPD is usually assessed and treated by an occupational therapist. So if you think a kiddo might have SPD, I would talk to an occupational therapist about that. And what about giftedness? So yes, a lot of overlap here. Studies show that roughly, some studies are like 75%, other I think I saw up to 82%, roughly 80% or more gifted people are also highly sensitive. Not all highly sensitive people are gifted, but most gifted children and adults are highly sensitive. While there are many similarities, the main difference is that giftedness includes a higher than average IQ and very fast processing. So just a little note about that. Now, even though it's different from high sensitivity is different from ADD, ADHD, autism, and SPD, but very similar to giftedness, the things I'm going to talk about now are relevant. They're things that are going to help all kids, but they will also really help your kids with autism, but it's not enough. Kids on the spectrum need more intervention than what I'm talking about today. But some of the things I'm going to talk about can also help them, help kids with ADHD, but again, not enough. But this is mostly for typical highly sensitive kids, but will also be helpful in kids who are highly sensitive with disabilities or who have autism or ADHD or SPD. Okay. So let's talk about it. Hscs at school. So I talked about differential susceptibility. I was kind of focusing more at home, but teacher warmth is even more impactful for a sensitive student. While shaming or punitive measures create more harm that lasts longer than it would for a typical child. I'm going to talk more about shame next week. I'm really going to focus on shame and how it impacts more vulnerable kids. But here is a quote from Dr. Elaine Aron, author of The Highly Sensitive Child. With a few bad experiences, Hscs are more likely than others to become shy, fearful, or depressed. But with a little guidance, they are exceptionally creative, cooperative, kind, except when overwhelmed. They could very well turn into monsters when overwhelmed, but they're just doing their best, right? And they will mature. They will learn more emotional regulation with just a little. See, she said just a little. It's not actually hard, but it does take a shift in our perspective. A few simple things. Traditional school practices present problems for Hscs. So schools are noisy, crowded, and busy, and the days are long. Hscs can get bored, right? They often grasp new concepts right away, but then they have to wait while the teacher reviews content repeatedly to other students, which you have to do. I'm not saying you got to stop that, but you can imagine how it gets boring for some of those kids that are getting it right away. You already know that. So then at that point, the Hsc's mind wanders then returns, finds they've missed something, oh gosh, super stressful, right? Very troubled. What have I missed? What am I supposed to know? They're going to know I wasn't paying attention. I'm going to be in trouble. All these things going through their head. There are a lot of demands and punishments at school, and they are designed to get through to the most stubborn, non-sensitive children. These demands and punishments are not typically adjusted for sensitive children, as the sensitive kids are just expected to toughen up. HSCs usually try very hard to meet every demand at school, but they can be crushed by the intensity of like a whole class punishment, or even if they're punished personally for something, they can be crushed by the intensity of it, while other kids just feel like bad or rejected or a little or disappointed or a little jarred, and then they move on. The HSC is going to go home and cry for the whole evening about it to their parents. Their parents might not even bring it up to you at school because they think, oh gosh, this kid just needs to learn to deal with it. They also might find themselves left out, either because they have had strong reactions in the past that kind of push others away, or because they withdraw due to overstimulation, and their quiet, observant nature can make them seem odd or aloof, boring, shy, afraid, etc. By the time they figured out the social structure of school or a new classroom, other kids have formed friendships, and then they're out of the loop. So here is how you can help. Number one, help them find a friend. So if you be on the lookout for kids who maybe haven't made friends yet, okay, they're quiet, they're sweet, but they're still going around the playground alone. You can make such a difference. One of my daughter is very well liked by kids, but when she started a new school, it took her a while. And the teacher, oh my gosh, I was so grateful to her. She noticed this, and I think I brought it up to her too. And then she was on the lookout. She was able to connect my daughter with a couple of sweet girls, and it made all the difference. My daughter then looked forward to going to school, and it was no longer a stressful kind of sad thing. And she was just the new kid, and she was figuring out the classroom, and it was just a lot, right? So sometimes they just need a little nudge. They can be great friends, but they need a little nudge to find friends. So if you see other kids who might be a little bit quiet, or both of them might need a friend, or a small group of kind, friendly students, try to arrange for the HSC to sit with them or work on a project together. It can make all the difference, not just for the kid, but for the parents too. Peace of mind, and they will just love you. And seek input from parents and previous teachers. Now, let me tell you, first of all, you might not even notice these kids. A lot of times, these kids might not present any problems at school. They're rule followers, they're quiet, they do well academically, but that doesn't mean they're not having problems with school. It's just that you're not seeing the problems. You're not seeing the anxiety that comes out at home. You're not seeing that they're lonely because you've got so much going on, right? But if you do notice something, or if this tends to come up at a conference, ask about the child at home. Often they see a bright, competent, silly, life-loving child at home, and they're so scared you don't see that child at school, and they want you to see the child for who they are. Ask what helps the child feel more comfortable and do their best. They often have really helpful insight, and it's usually like really simple things. And you can also find out what worked in past classrooms. If they had a teacher they really connected with, like I said, a goodness of fit between environment and temperament is everything for sensitive children. So as they grow older, they will learn to adjust to their environment. But in the meantime, they kind of need their environment to adjust to them in those younger grades like elementary school. Encourage that creativity. These kiddos are highly creative and helpful. So you can encourage this by, you probably already do this first one, but offer creative writing exercise, clever problems to solve, logic activities like logic math can be really fun for an HSC if that's kind of their strength. Visual and performing arts can be wonderful for HSCs. Choose literature that deals with complex moral issues or emotional themes, or at least offer that kind of literature in the independent reading area of your classroom. And if you have the time and the emotional capacity yourself, if you can let them help you at recess or lunchtime, maybe not every day, but if it seems like recess is overwhelming to them, let them read outside of your class or stay inside, or if there is a teacher or the library is open, maybe they can go read in the library. It's okay. They're going to get some socialization, but sometimes they just need that time to recharge their overstimulation. But also, if they can help you at lunchtime, like the example that I read earlier, that can make a big difference. HSCs have close ties to nature, and they can thrive helping take care of plants, gardens, or a class pet. And they can be very good peer tutors to English learners or students struggling to grasp a concept, since they are good at communicating and grasping nonverbal cues. They can be real gems in this way. Now, I mentioned you don't need to over accommodate. That's not going to do anyone any favors. They've got to learn to kind of push out of their comfort zone so that they can be resilient in life. Okay. Research shows, and this is really interesting to me, small doses of over-arousal at the start of the school year can leave secure HSCs, okay, healthy, secure HSCs, less prone to over-arousal in the same situations later in the year. It's sort of like desensitization. But if they are not a secure HSC, this is not for the kid who shows up on day one and cries all day. That's not the time to give them a little dose of over-arousal. They're already having a big dose of over-arousal. So they would be hurt from such pushing. Get a sense, if you can, this requires some emotional intelligence. Get a sense of when to push and when to back off or protect. Being over pushed or under pushed both do more harm than good. When you decide to push, set them up for success in small steps and praise and celebrate their success so that they'll be eager to engage again next time. Let them take their time. In the previous webinar, I talked about introverts having a longer runway before they're ready to take off and fly. That's the same thing for HSCs. They have a longer runway. So let them take their time. It can take weeks or even months for an HSC to adjust to a new environment. So if they don't want to join in, you can let them take their time and observe. And then if it seems like they've been observing for a while and you want to see if they're ready, then you could give them a little nudge. If it's too much, back off. But that might be just a little nudge that they need. Avoid labeling them as fearful or shy. They're cautious, right? Cautious is a positive trait. Cautious only turns into fear if it's justified. So if they're holding back, it doesn't really mean that they're scared. I mean, they might be. They might just be cautious. And you can see that as kind of a positive trait. Let them take their time. And often they'll come around on their own and be more willing to be nudged when they see that you honor their needs. And avoid putting them on the spot. Invite them to participate in group discussions, but if they don't respond after a moment, just carry on like nothing happened, okay? Offer, and this can go for any kid really, offer a response like, oh, no worries, I'll give you some time to think and come back to you. I need that sometimes too. Or you can even say, you know what, maybe I wonder if you were thinking, and even kind of just fill in their answer for them and then move on. That will help them to trust you and just give them an out so that eventually you might see them starting to respond because they feel safe with you. Never use harsh discipline on HSCs. For one thing, they tend to be self-punishing. So they are probably already punishing themselves too much, and they don't really need it from the outside. They tend to be conscientious rule followers already, and really just gentle private reminders are enough. For some, just knowing they made a mistake will trigger tears. If reprimanded, punished, or embarrassed, they are likely to associate you with those feelings for the rest of their lives. They can hold a grudge, let's put it that way. But they are also very forgiving when an adult gives a sincere apology for losing their temper, because we all do it. You don't have to be perfect. If you're too harsh or you lose your temper, if you can sit down and be like, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. That probably made you feel bad. Look, you can't do this thing that you did, but also I lost my temper and I'm sorry. They're very forgiving. So you do have an opportunity to win them back. But they're going to remember very little about whatever lesson you were trying to teach them if you're overly harsh. So avoid raising your voice or sharpening your tone. That feels like a knife. If you can avoid making general accusations of wrongdoing in order to find a culprit, maybe sometimes you feel you have to do that, but just be aware. And an HSC who's been harshly reprimanded even once may stop trying for that teacher for the rest of the year, and then their school performance goes down. So you're human, be human. I'm not going to fault any teacher for losing it sometimes, because I know the job that you're doing. And then just repair the damage that may have done with some of those kids. And again, when you do that, you are modeling emotional intelligence, you're modeling how to repair relationships, and you're modeling that we all lose our temper sometimes, because that kid's going to do it too. And then here's how you clean that up, like we all have to do. So that's a huge lesson that you can teach them. And then look at the classroom from an HSC's perspective. Is it hot, cold, stuffy, smelly, dusty, overly bright, overly dim, cluttered, crowsy, noisy? You can't control all of that, but any of this will likely affect all of your students negatively to some degree. So if you can see it through that lens and make any changes you might be able to make, that will be helpful. Having plants in a room really makes a big difference too. Transition warnings, give them more time than seems necessary. So they need that transition. We do this in special education all the time, and it really helps our kids, and it's going to help all kids, but more than necessary. Okay, so you might say, all right, you guys have 10 more minutes to write, 5 more minutes, 2 more minutes, but you can write more at home if you choose, because some kids just want to keep going, and we love that, right? We want that. And then 30 more seconds. All right, pencils down. I know if it's a test, they probably can't write more at home, but I'm just thinking a general writing assignment in class. Quiet time and spaces. If you're lucky enough to have flexible seating, I know that's become a trend that I love and I think is really cool. Then that can benefit all of your kids, especially HSCs. If you can create quiet areas where kids can retreat when things get overstimulating, this can be available to any student, not just the sensitive types. So you might create a hut where lights are low and noise can be lessened, such as even an extra desk that you put a blanket partway over and pillows underneath. Off in the corner, still in your visual proximity so that things are safe, but a little bit of kind of a nook. Comfy reading corners, beanbag chairs, noise canceling headphones. Those can be really expensive, but I think they have some that are affordable, or maybe you could, ask for that, just 1 or 2 pairs, so that if a kid is just having a day, that can be really helpful. Keep in mind that a reset takes 20 minutes. Now, you might not always have 20 minutes, but it takes 20 minutes of quiet time for an overstimulated child to reset. So it's better to avoid overstimulation in the first place, but it happens. And if a child has a meltdown at school, if you can let them go up to the office, not to be in trouble, or go to another teacher's class who maybe their kids are out at recess or whatever, and just allow them the time and space they need to feel better so that they can regroup and rejoin. That's better for their dignity, right? So they can get themselves together and they're not like having tears and that's embarrassing. But and avoid treating HSC meltdowns as behavior problems, and instead see them for what they are. They are a response to overwhelm and big feelings before they have developed better coping skills. That's all that it is. They will mature. They will develop better coping skills, especially in the right environment with the right adult support, but they're not there yet. I know some adults who are not there yet that aren't even highly sensitive, right? So give them that grace and have that perspective. Regular periods of quiet time can help prevent overwhelm. Something that you should know is that overwhelm builds at school and is released at home. It's important to know that an HSC has a brilliant poker face. It may seem that very little affects them at school, but it all builds up and comes out at home. There are often tears and tantrums, even in the car ride home after a busy day in school, but no signs of any issues at school. And a parent might really, if they bring this up, they don't really want to hear, well, they're fine at school, and kind of the parent might be feeling like you think it's a problem at home. Okay, a parent needs a teacher to really understand how this works. If a parent thinks it's a problem at home, oh my gosh, I'm glad they're great at school, but they are such a problem at home, these tantrums, you can take that as an opportunity to educate the parent. You know what? You're their safe space. They are probably internalizing, taking everything in at home, and then it all comes out. Everything in at school, and then it all comes out at home. And then you might say, what about some calming activities? Can you give them 30 minutes to an hour to just go in their room for screen time? I know screen time is like one of those controversial topics, but it can calm a kid down. And is 1 hour going to harm them before it's time for homework or whatever? Or let them, listen to music and play with squishy toys, play with some sensory activities for 30 minutes. Those are things that you can offer a parent. The good news is they're learning emotional regulation. They are showing that at school they can regulate their emotions, but they're still little and it's got to come out. So they're learning that. It doesn't mean their whole lives are going to be like that, calm at work and then break into tears at home. They'll have days like that as adults, but they are learning. So it's actually a positive thing, but it's hard on the parents. You can use their emotional insight to your advantage. So an HSC is like a sponge when it comes to emotions. Their insight in a classroom can actually be very enlightening, as they might sense when others are uncomfortable and struggling. You can consider an HSC kind of like a canary in a coal mine. If they're not okay, you might want to take a look at the people around them, because the others might not be okay either. And finally, let's see, okay, just a couple more slides here, and then I'll open it up to questions. Practice self-care. If you're feeling you're stressed or just not yourself, your students will know it. All of your students have those mirror neurons, especially your HSCs, and it might distract some of your kids and cause them to worry. So it's important to be self-aware. I mentioned this earlier, model this to your students. Oh, I got to tell you guys, good morning. I'm just not feeling myself today. I didn't sleep well. I'm here. I'm going to do my best, but thank you for being patient with me if I seem a little off. That normalizes feelings, it normalizes overwhelm because it happens to all of us. And you are modeling good self-care and emotion regulation and self-awareness. Those are huge. If you find yourself losing your temper with your class, because it happens, consider taking a mental health day or carving out 5 minutes at lunch to meditate, listen to a meditation on YouTube. There's loads of 5-minute meditations, or plan to do something that you look forward to after school to get you through the day, or something soothing after school, okay? And finally, see them, respect their differences, and enjoy them. Even HSCs who seem really shy or keep to themselves need their teachers to see them and value their strengths and special talents. Take time to connect with them and get to know them in a relaxed way. Speak positively about their strengths to the entire class, but in a way that's fairly quick and casual because you don't want to put them on the spot, make them uncomfortable. And some of our most inspiring leaders and creative people are highly sensitive, and you may have a future leader or artist in your class, such as Albert Einstein, Martin Luther King Jr., Judy Garland, Mahatma Gandhi, Fred Rogers, Alanis Morissette, Robin Williams, Greta Garbo. The list goes on and on. So in summary, highly sensitive children need a goodness of fit in their home and school lives in order to unlock deep potential and help them develop the coping skills and confidence that they will need throughout their lives. And there's a list of my sources. I am going to go ahead and put the PowerPoint back in the chat again, because I know anybody who joined after I already did that, you don't see it. I have to put it in after you've joined. So there you go. And we have a few minutes for any questions or any comments or thoughts or anything that you want to share. Go ahead and just unmute yourself and you can speak up.
I don't have questions, but I am very, very thankful that I chose to join you because I am the parent involvement liaison where I work at Walt Disney School. And this is such a great opportunity to do more research and do a presentation for parents.
Yeah.
Yes. Aware of what if the child is misbehaving or something like that, it's not something that he's just being bad. It could be a hypersensitive child.
Yes.
And I'm speaking as a Hispanic and in my culture. My experience is me, being a Hispanic. Sometimes in our culture we think, oh, that's just silly. Some people, they say, oh no, it's just like that. No, it isn't. There's research and there is this evidence that that child can be hypersensitive child and we need to help them. In a busy environment, yelling or doing things that will maybe startle or the child is not going to help them. We need to understand them. And I will do more research and prepare a presentation for parents. I usually consult with the instruction practices coach, teacher, and the principal, of course. And the psychologist, I could get her involved in to make the parents be aware that the children need that. And it would be so great to go to the teacher and say, you know, little Michael is like this and that. And if you don't mind, you know, doing this for him, well, maybe a child is in kinder or first grade and not yet in special ed or perhaps will be. So they are aware to make the school a little easier for them. And even in preschool. So I'm very thankful that I'm here learning so much. It's really good.
Good. Well, I'm so glad that you came. Thank you. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions?
Question, Tiffany, if I may. Do you find that HSPs are more likely to, how do I put it? You know how there's often group projects like at university or whatever. It seems like I was often finding that it's just more efficient and faster if I just do it myself rather than having to, you know, work with other people and get the project done. But I know oftentimes these days, especially in college or whatever, that's actually the whole point of the project, is to be able to work with other people. But I mean, have you find that HSPs are more likely to say, oh, it's just more efficient if I just do it by myself?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's specific to highly sensitive people. I know a lot of people share that. Maybe more specific to introverts,
Okay,
which
yes.
many introverts are highly sensitive. So I could definitely see that being an overlap. But also it makes sense because there's a lot more to take in a group project, and you're trying to learn the content and complete the project. So that all could get more overwhelming to someone who's highly sensitive. And I'm going to stop recording just in case anyone has anything personal.